How do you go about achieving self-transformation? Is it done through mindfulness practices? Perhaps a movement or body-focused exercise like yoga? Or maybe by working on interpersonal relationships? Well, what if I was to say it could be supported by a group of practices? Today, in this beautiful conversation with Ethan and Tamaki Kobayashi-Hsieh, we discuss an ecology of practices that they have developed called Tiamat, which aims to help people expand the ways in which they interact with the world around them and their inner world. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting Tamaki and Ethan for this Inner Sense conversation, and I hope you enjoy hearing about their approach. Please do remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more information about inner body awareness, that is interoception, and how you can harness it to improve your well-being. Thank you. Tamaki and Ethan, hello and welcome to the Inner Sense channel. I'm so pleased you can join us.
Likewise, man. Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you very much.
And I have to give credit to John Viveki for introducing me to your work, and hopefully we're going to talk about lots of interesting topics around your movement practice. So please, before we go into that, can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up establishing 5 to Midnight and the Tiamat practice or ecology of practices?
My background has primarily been in performance. I started as an actor, went to drama school in your neck of the woods. And so it was very interesting. At that point in time, I was really invested in getting a kind of formal training in the craft of acting, whatever that meant. And so, you have a structured syllabus and everything. And I got really fascinated with what I had recognized as certain knowledge gaps that were appearing in my experience of the training, as well as certain things that it was really quite powerfully opening up for me. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later because there's a lot to do with Tiamat. So I started doing this very disruptive student thing. And we had a church, St. Peter's Church, which sometimes we'll use as an extra classroom or rehearsal space. And I would go down to student services and I would book that space out as much as I could for the week. And I would go into the library, I would go into internet articles that I would find, or even sometimes I would consult practitioners from other countries to say, hey, let's share some exercises and see what we can do. And we had a few of my classmates and seniors were interested in this exploration, trying to find out okay, is there an intercultural acting training method? And that's kind of the first question. So we had to unpack that. What is culture? What is intercultural role? Is it dangerous? And I think it still is to step into or make assumptions that there is a universal method that works for everybody. But we were trying to wrestle with that. And so I did this for pretty much a whole year. And then after that, I left drama school and said, okay, you know what? I want to try and really do this in kind of my home ground, I suppose, which is Asia at large. And so we got invited over to Indonesia. I got a chance to share what little I had found, in Makassar, and that I can credit to our dear friend Abdi, who brought us over for 10 days, and actually that was before I met you. Yeah, so brought me over for 10 days, and then got to experiment with it, and it pretty much grew from there until we stumbled upon John's work. So that was only last year. In the meantime, we had gone and done workshops in Taiwan and Japan, where I met you, and really seeing that in some weird way, what we had found in that church all the way up to Japan seemed to have some kind of effect on people. It's mixed as everything is, but it seemed to have start to have some invariance. So only when I discovered John's work that I was like, oh wow, so there are actually terms to be able to propositionalize or describe what was happening to people from an observer's point of view. But then I'm still very interested in the subjective experience. And so that's why every conversation needs to have Tamachan to check that bias out and make sure that I'm not talking about something from out my ass. Yeah, so, hi, dozo.
My background, So I've been a dancer and I became actor and I came back to dancer and I'm now doing the performance artist. But my upbringing was really, really happy. Like I was surrounded by really loving parents, but I had a history of eating disorder and mental health, depression. So I was a performer, but at the same time, I've been always questioning, oh, what's healthy? Like what's healthy relationship? What's healthy family? What's health for me? Like how can I be healthy? I am doing the thing that I love, and expression is the thing that I love, and that's supposed to. I thought that that's the thing that can save me, but that doesn't seem to be saving me. Mm-hmm. So what is happening in me? I have really, really great friends and family, and everything seems to be perfect, but I have problem. And I feel like the reason why I've been doing theater was to search for it, because that's the place where I could find to be myself. Like I could allow myself to be in this theater setting. So like I've been discovering this relationship with health and self through theater work. And there's always like some hint in this thing, but it's like something like this, something like this, something like this, something like this. And so I could see the path is narrowing down, but yet I couldn't really structuralize what actually is the thing that I can solve. And along the way, I met 5 to Midnight and Tiamat. And through Tiamat exercise, I felt like I realized that the relationship with self was really, really misaligned. I've been always thinking that, oh, there is going to be solution outside. Mm-hmm. But encountering Tiamat was the thing that made me realize that, oh, it was about me and the world. How I see myself is reflected to how I see my world, mm-hmm. and how it shows to me. So yeah, that's how like I joined 5 to Midnight. But he seems to be only targeting on artists, like teaching this method to artists. But I kept saying that, no, it's not just for artists. Like it's much more than that, because it's really about relationship with self, relationship with the people who is around, relationship with the environment, relationship with the world. So it's important for everybody, every human being. So yeah, but yet I didn't know how to, like navigate that. So really like encountering John was really like, blessing for us to be able to like structuralize, verbalize, and to see what we are doing from a metacognitive point of view, and then to realize what it really is, something that we can offer to much broader people.
So, and even then, like to bring the present moment to relationship also, it's being able to contact people like yourself, and the community of people who are doing work that can very much inform Tiamat. I have to really privilege Dr. Kevin Liu from the University of Essex, who I believe is head of department now of psychosocial studies. But like he was saying Tiamat really needs to be an open system. It needs to be welcoming of people to come in and say, you know, hey, like this is some work that I'm doing, and you know, this is what we found, and there's some scientific backing to it, because we are no longer in the age of like the 1920s or the 50s or the 60s when artists like myself who are interested in the craft of being, the craft of performing on stage or off, we're not working in a vacuum anymore. And so I feel really, really blessed actually to have this conversation with somebody who has your background, but also has a healthy interest in what we're doing, to be able to help, like, you know, clear the fog from some mysteries that, you know, are like wrecking me because I have no knowledge whatsoever in this regard. So yeah.
Thank you. Oh, thank you both. Wonderful introduction, and you've both shared the questions and the curiosity and the reasons why you've been attracted or driven down the path you've gone. So I totally agree that, you know, that it is an exciting age, and being able to connect in just a matter of a space of days to people on the other side of the planet on a topic that we have some shared interest in is incredible. And what you said about this, you know, both aspects being important. So my personal experience, either cognitively or embodied experience, being important, but also being in community with other people and checking our biases and finding a language to get a shared understanding. I think it's an incredibly exciting time for being able to do both of those things. So Tiamat, what sort of, before we talk about what it is, what kind of people or take part in your practice or workshops? How what community do you tend to attract?
So it started out just being for actors. I think Tamaki mentioned that earlier. And then now I think, particularly since we opened up for, I think more from the paradigm of wisdom cultivation, we started to get a broader range of artists, including performing artists, musicians. We've always wanted to include people like designers and architects, which we have now, a couple. One of them happens to be an architect and a musician, but also like theorists and anthropologists. We even had a hockey player at one point, professional athletes. So and it's not limited by, I think, age range. I think this is something which I want to address quite publicly also. It's like, I think a lot of the exercises can feel intimidating physically, but in a way, the physical achievement of an exercise is kind of not the point, because there isn't a unilaterally defined goal for what the perfect exercise execution looks like. And it's much more about developing one's relationship to a physical practice, to a meditation and contemplative practice, to a dialectical practice that is at the core really of what we're trying to wrap our heads around and wrap our hands around. Yeah. And so if that means people come into better relationship with themselves, then that's a wonderful side effect, which I'm happy to propagate. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I agree that, and I think this is one of the things we'll come on to later when you talk about the critique of some of the wisdom practices, or how they're used or experienced these days, that it's a little bit like that painting with numbers, you know, it's versus encouraging someone just to express and be playful and experience in whatever way they want. So Tiamat, I was intrigued on your website to read that the practice aims to facilitate an individual's capacity for self-transformation. So we can kind of be clear on definitions. In a nutshell, what do you think is, or what do you feel is required for transformation to occur, or what is transformation?
I actually want to privilege your definition of what transformation is. Yeah, I think it's been quite profound for both of us. I've recently gone through a renaissance as well. COVID very much helped with that. I think I can speak for you also, right? That the COVID period really was transformative in certain ways. Yeah, but also I'm just aware that I want to turn the light on. So by all means, get started, and I'll just run over here and turn the light on.
So the transformation for me. I feel that transformation is expansion of the range that I can communicate with. So it's about self, it's about the world or people also. I feel through like experiences, the parts of the body that I can communicate with expanded. And that's like unconscious brought into consciousness. Like I knew that, like, for example, like I can feel that it's uncomfortable, but I don't know exactly. But that becomes more communicatable in really, really like detail. And I feel like that guides to like communication with the others. Being able to observe my body and also being able to communicate, bring me to be able to communicate with the other's body. And not even just like not body, like it's even just nature or just the city or community or like society as a structure. It feels more visual and salient and resonating. It doesn't feel detached. It feels, yes, we are living together because we can communicate. It's no longer, somebody who I've never talked to, so it doesn't matter to me.
It sounds like it's less alienating. Yes.
Even like plants or anything that's around.
Yeah, I really loved it because you're articulating a kind of deep connection with reality as we perceive it. Sorry, so can I just clarify that your sense of what self-transformation is that it's altering the way in which you connect with the world and reality?
Includes self.
Including the self. Yeah, right. So it's a difference with how you interact with your inner experience and then also including how that translates to the outer experience. I love this because I think you spoke my mind basically. Like, I just want to, but because of that, I want to add on a little bit. I think from the more zoomed out propositional perspective. If you have more to go, please
No,
go ahead.
I think it's clear.
Great, yeah, because that's really important first to hear. I think from the zoomed out perspective, then we think of. I challenge people to think of self-transformation as including the agency of the self, right? So when we think of a transformative experience, transformed by what? Transformed by the text, transformed by the audience, transformed by the director, transformed by your therapist, or your mom, or your friends, or what is it, right? So transformed by what? So self-transformation in this case is really, I'm trying to invoke this sense that the person themselves has agency over the direction that they would like to grow and develop. And for me, and I speak from the context of a theater director, at least in my work and in the style in which I work, I often request that the actor bring their creativity into the room in spades. And that means they have to claim their agency, right? How do you want a character to develop? How do you want to guide this process? And then I'm just sort of moving the pieces around in a way that looks pretty. So when I think about, hey, what moves us towards self-transformation? John has articulated this also very, very eloquently in his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. It requires three very, very fundamental mechanics, which to me, I've tried building into the exercises. One is decentering. So, being able to not identify with a set version of the self, right? Or whatever it is that means. We call that the conscious, or the conscious aspects of self, we call that the ego, at least in Jungian terms. So being able to decenter and say, hey, that's parts of me, a chunk of me, a portion of me, aspects of me, then, hey, what am I? What is the self, right? So there is the ability to do that. And when we can layer that recursively and go, okay, I am not my body, okay, but I can observe my emotions and my thoughts. Therefore, they're also not me. I'm not identified with them. Wow, okay. How can I recursively move back? And this is starting to come into Vedantic language here. Mm-hmm. So now, when we think about the second aspect, which is de-automatization. So to become conscious of unconscious processes. Mm. So many things we do all the time. Like say now I invite the audience to start to become aware of your breathing. Mm. For some people, it can be very, very uncomfortable to like, I'm breathing in, but now I'm not breathing in anymore. How am I breathing? But we do that all the time. So the same thing goes with cognitive processes. The same thing goes with feeling emotions. And sometimes they have us, they overwhelm us. They dictate our relationships and our behaviors. So I think as Carl Jung very famously said, until the unconscious is brought to the conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Mm-hmm. And so when we think of fate here, is like, again, that sense of having no agency. So then the third part of it is fluency, which is the ability to move between a state of, not aware of my unconscious processes. I am aware of my conscious processes. I can become aware of what was previously automatic. I can become aware of how much I identify with something or not. And I can, with great virtuosity, maneuver those things and procedurally enact them or pull away from them a little bit and to decide when to use them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's something we layer into our practices as key fundamental mechanics that are allowing self-transformation to possibly occur. It's more complicated than that, but there is that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I love that kind of inquiry, those, the decentering, the automation or automaticity, and the fluidity. So the being able to fluidly shift our attention and intention and be curious about it. As you were talking, I was just coming to mind I don't know, are you familiar with Mark Solm's work? He wrote a book called The Hidden Spring that was out, I think, last year or earlier this year.
I've heard John mention him, I think. Yeah.
It's a masterpiece, an incredible masterpiece. And he he's quoting someone else in his book, but he asked this question: why isn't everything relegated to automaticity? Why do we become conscious of anything? Why do we have this sense of free will or exploration or play? So, because you could argue that, and John covers this, you got this combinatorial explosion and relevance realization in a changing world. It allows us to optimize in a changing world. So, we have the answers, but it's an interesting question, isn't it? Why isn't everything relegated to automaticity?
Because it's not it doesn't offer utility necessarily.
No,
there's limited utility there. Well, that's a huge discussion, but lovely, amazing question. Yes. I want to read this.
So this channel is about interoception, the inner sense channel. So you've implied it already in terms of the relationship with our inner self. And the terms that we're kind of hidden, this hidden idea of a hidden state, that the world is actually, we've got this sensory veil, the world is hidden from us to a certain extent, and we're only getting partial information through our five senses. And the same is true for our body. It might feel like, I'm aware of my body, but it's somewhat hidden. So I really like what you said about coming into better relationship with the world and our internal state. So I just wanted to say, why the fit with what you're doing and this channel is that it is about, to a certain extent, about internal awareness, but you go further with that with your work, and you talk about the relationship with our external world and how we act and move through the world. So can you say a little bit more about the Tiamat ecology of practices and some of the kind of categories of cognitive mechanics, and how you encourage people or guide people through combining movement with these different dimensions or different ways of experiencing this, what John would call the agent arena relationship? I think in your video with John, I saw there was four. You mentioned four categories.
Yes.
Fully on me.
It's fully on me.
I cannot answer.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. You said that's fully on you. Yeah, okay. So we have four heads of Tiamat. Metacognition, which is the ability to think about your thinking. And there's some wonderful wealth of research already being done on metacognition. There's interoception, which is rightly why we're here. We talk about active imagination, which is the ability to consciously engage with the transcendent, what Jung calls the transcendent function. At least that's what originally was called, which implies a sense of engaging with the fantasy, the symbolic language that exists within our unconscious. And then there is the transjective rationality, which is being able to swap from the subjective experience to the objective experience, and so often that it becomes something that we can look at as a whole, and that's where we get rational thinking. We're starting to, in a sense, dialogue between the subjective inner experience and the outer world. So when all of these four come together, I'm theorizing, at least at the moment, that we start to arrive at something called the autopoietic pantheon. So there is a kind of subjective sense of the way that the world presents itself to us and how we enact ourselves within it in this rightly called agent arena relationship. At the moment, I feel that it's a symbolic language. It speaks in the form of like effigies for some people, or sensations, things that are ineffable and not necessarily very convenient to reduce to semantics. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So particularly the interoceptive component here is that, again, this question of like, why aren't we just running through life automatically and unconsciously? Is because it doesn't really offer a kind of utility. It doesn't, I don't think doing that necessarily affords us ways to interact with things that are very highly complex in our society, whether they are really complex social interactions. For example, talking to somebody halfway around the world is a very, very complex cognitive task, right? So the way that we get quite a lot of information is, yes, external, but then what's happening inside? How is everything here that I'm perceiving trying to bring into relationship this idea of causal patterns, how is all of this impacting me inside? Now, I don't have to bring every little thing that I feel up to you. I don't have to let you know that, oh, my psoas is tight at the moment and I can feel them pulsing. It's not useful to you, right? I hope. But, it's useful for me. Maybe. What do I do about it? Okay, great. So, let's try this experiment, right? If I were to bring this up and say, okay, my psoas is tight right now as I'm talking to you, it derails this conversation into something else. Then the viewers don't really understand, like, why am I bringing this up? It's not relevant. Now, I have to be able to do quite a lot of complex cognitive mechanics and take this topic that we're cohering around with my physical experience and go, okay, I'm going to try and bring this back and keep it to the line, which is that if, I'm recognizing that my psoas is tight. Okay, why is that? I'm developing an internal language for this. I might be wrong, but I need to figure this out. What is this telling me? Oh, okay. Maybe it's telling me that I really shouldn't be sitting and putting all my weight on my foot so I can get more comfortable. Why? Because I want to be comfortable talking to a new friend that I made. And so in this entire process, my experience of you is not being cut. You see, I'm not saying, okay, and Dr. Ian doesn't exist anymore. I'm just thinking about my psoas. No, it's happening at the same time. And so I can bring this into relationship with you here and say, okay, wow, this feels relevant to our conversation. Now, if we develop a language for understanding our bodies, completely subjectively, that is not necessarily bound to the semantic rules of having to communicate it to somebody else, well, I think we get a little bit closer towards self-understanding. I know that when this thing happens, I will feel this way. I can make a better decision to avoid that scenario, change my circumstances, change my conditions. And I will argue that think about this, right? That situation becomes salient to me. And I now have agency to change the way I interact with it. It doesn't have to overwhelm me, or I don't have to be affected by it in a way that I can't control. Then I can enact some wisdom in regards to this scenario. Very, very vital information.
Beautiful, thank you. And I think that's where the idea of an ecology of practices is useful as well, because and relevance fits into that. So, if we think of ecology as studying the relationship between things, so if you have a set of practices and then choosing what practice is relevant for the situation and having the right intention and attention, then the psoas may be relevant for when you're doing somatic circling or some kind of, but it's not necessarily relevant when we're talking about the introduction. We're still in the kind of introduction phase of becoming familiar with each other. So thank you for that. And can we move on to when you were speaking to John, this idea of the play point you mentioned, and you showed some videos of some structured movement patterns, which some people may be familiar with, kind of yoga type asanas, and also some primal animal movements. But then you were rather than painting by numbers or saying there's a perfect form or a way of doing it, you were talking about finding a point of where you maybe break free from the structure a little bit, either partly or completely, and a different type of intention or awareness comes in. So what's going on at that threshold?
Also,
while play point, I'm playing this play point.
Yeah.
I feel that in relationship with play point really interesting. It's neither training nor developing. It's playing. It's a playing point. So while I am doing the form, there's actually, while I am doing the form, like you said, introception wise, there's a lot of things that's happening, but I would anyway do it because it's form. And once I hit the play point, I can allow those information to express themselves. And by seeing that happening, I can recognize that, it's like unpacking. Now, this was the thing that was happening. Okay. And then since it's kind of like resolved, so I can come back to the form and then observe what's happening inside. And I feel that repetition is the thing that is kind of like second order thinking, third order thinking, fourth order thinking, and then become more real. The observation for the body becomes more detailed over time.
Yeah, it's kind of like if we're doing, let's say you're doing, 20 reps of bicep curls in the gym, right? That's the form. You want to keep the form. All the attention is on the form. Am I doing this correctly? Now in that action of that 20 reps, a lot of stuff is happening in the mind. There's a lot of information, as you articulated here, like interoceptively, that is giving some feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to say, maybe I shouldn't push that far. Maybe your body's telling you that. Maybe listen to it. Otherwise, you end up, hurting yourself or going quite far with it. But then when we say in the context of these play points in animal forms or in Tiamat, it's more expressive than it is functional. It does fulfill that function, but it is much more expressive. It's saying, okay, what do I have to do? And the form allows me to do this. What can I explore in the play point that allows me to renew my attention to this exercise so I can keep getting the benefits of the exercise, right? Mm-hmm. That's one. But again, I use this term, the renewing of attention, the keeping myself interested, the keeping myself available and flexible enough to go, I'm not just doing this thing. I'm going, I'm gonna do. Wow, there's so much more I can play with. Oh, I've never tried that before. Oh, there's room here for insight and exploration. And it's when we have like something structured within that movement sequence, a specific point that says, you better play here, man, like really enjoy this. Wow, there's a moment here there's some turning point. There's a kairos here where I don't have to worry about whether I'm doing the move correctly. That's not the point now. The macro form has taken that. The meta form has allowed me to do that. I can spend this time enjoying myself and exploring myself with very, 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 very thin boundaries. But yes. And so that sets up a foundation for that play point, whatever you find in there, to be exacted to the rest of the form. And we explore this later on in the progression, as Tamaki demonstrated in that video, to the point where the structured form almost doesn't exist anymore, because that play point has given sown the seeds for exploration and innovation, to the point where, you do this for 3 months, it's like your animal forms are very different from Tamaki's. Mm-hmm. But guess what? You can learn from each other and explore that. And that's what I'm talking about when it says it has to be an open system. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. And also I feel it comes to daily life too. So like, for example, when there was time that I needed to write a paper document, there was a structure, there was a form, but I really didn't want to do it. So like I listened to the music and I pretended that I'm playing the piano. And like, it's kind of like hit the drum. Like, it's like, rhythmically like type the document. And then like, I enjoyed it. Like I played it, but I get to be done. I finished. Like adapted.
Yeah. And Tamaki, what I get a sense of from you, but both with that example and when you described before about, finding the play point, and then from your movements, I got an impression of something where within that play point, maybe there's different types of play as well. So there can be this kind of what if I go left? What if I go right? What if I go forward? What if I tense or relax? And that's all kind of structured. And then I looked like something else happened as well, where it took on a life of its own, and it wasn't, thinking about it. It was more like this fascial unwinding or kundalini energy, or being danced rather than dancing, that kind of almost going back to automaticity, but a different explorative automaticity. Is that correct to say there's two different types of play?
I love this. I love what you're saying here, because this thing that you're articulating of it, like almost becoming automaticity, that's really one of the reasons why we train metacognition so much, and why there has to be a meditative and contemplative practice, is so that we stop falling into a trance-like state. And that's full-blown automaticity, where I think Nikolai Demidov in his book called it a motor storm. So if you imagine like a pigeon flying into the room by accident, it doesn't know to go, shit, not supposed to be here. I'll just go there. No, it panics and it freaks out and it becomes automatic. So the metacognition is there to say, okay, you want to explore this thing? Great. Let's allow that. Let's allow that more fully. Let's really dive into this and to be able to self-regulate, so that it does not fall into complete automaticity. Because then after that, it's like whatever you find in that exploration, there's less probability of being able to repeat that or to pull that out and say, I want to continue this exploration.
It's kind of like difference between first time riding the bicycle and get to understand riding the bicycle. So like when I am still like mindful about the movement, whether I should be going forward, but it's a time that I'm still letting my dad hold the bicycle and so that I'm being mindful. But once I get used to it, and then I am actually observing from much farther place and let myself play.
I sense that Ian wants to ask like the next question actually, and that has
checking where we were on track, but that's letting yourself play. I think that's maybe a challenge for some people, especially in group settings. It can be a challenge for people. On a slight tangent. John introduced me to one of his students, Hongyu, and we've been talking about some what seem like spontaneous movements, and sometimes they're John and Hongyu have been talking about emotional goosebumps, the phenomena of chills going down your spine. But in the manual therapy world, we have something called fascial release, which is when, I don't know if you've come across this, when the body kind of gets to a point where it can explore and open up, and then it seems like the movement is happening spontaneously, but you can modulate it, stop or start it or whatever. And then there's this TRE, David Bocelli. Have you come across his work? Tension releasing exercise or trauma releasing exercises, which he uses tremor. He induces tremoring. So I was thinking about that as well, in relation to, whether there's that all these thresholds between what we're allowing through a structured practice brings us to a place, or a ritual brings us to a place of safely allowing something to happen that we can, but what you said about staying conscious so that we can still learn from it or still renew that awareness.
Yeah, there's what you've just said brings to mind, I think it was Ida Rolf that was talking about the issues are in the tissues. I think it was Ida Rolf. Yeah, so, and actually this, like the tremor release stuff is very present in a few schools of voice work, actually, that I got quite a privilege to touch when I was in drama school. And I think to this topic, right, the body, in a sense, at the very least, when we're trying to promote interoception, it's recognizing that, there's something here, right? And there's something to be said for it spontaneously occurring, I think, and there's, an emotional discharge, something happens, and I'm sure that there are ways to keep that safeguard. But I think there's also value in recognizing that, there's something here. I don't know what it is. Now may not be the right time to look at it, but I want to be able to get to the place where I can look at that someday comfortably. Because where I've started to also like delve into this in my own personal practice with Tiamat is recognizing that there are some things inside there which I don't know if I want to touch. I grew up with a very abusive childhood, and for a good decade of my life. And we just went through, I think craniosacral therapy yesterday. Yeah. And that's really, really an interesting, in-depth, detailed exercise of interoception, at least the way that we were facilitated through it.
Mm.
And I feel like, and this is really just an intuitive kind of hunch, if something like that were to occur for me spontaneously, I would wonder about, oh, am I ready for that? Like cognitively, mentally, you know, for that kind of emotional discharge? Do I have to, rely on Tamachan to give me that emotional support that I need? Or is there another path that I can choose where I go, I'm gonna keep an eye on that and work my way towards being able to go through that safely? And I've done that for quite a few issues before that already, like before where I am today. And that was during COVID. So I think there is definitely a balance to be struck between the two and how they scaffold each other.
Yeah, I agree. And whether it's the rapid route or the kind of gentle journey, either way, it's best done when it feels right and the time is right and safely. Otherwise, people can, feel very empty or exposed afterwards. And then what do you then pack around that thing that's been opened up? You want to pack some good things around it again, or build from it rather than leave it open to either closing back to the same thing or putting something else unhealthy around the the space that's being opened up.
Or even worse, getting to the place where, if it's in a social setting, for example, right? Having an emotional discharge is like, oh, I'm doing the thing. Let me see if I can always push myself to get an emotional discharge every single time I show up for one of these, and that's coming into, getting a right relationship with the self, like the emotional body and the physical body. Of course, the physical body will give you information as to what's happening. But when we come to an idea of, hey, what's my right relationship to myself and my emotional state, then I think we can avoid some of those pitfalls, I think. Because anyway, even at that point as a practitioner, right, if somebody has a really emotional reaction to something, there's no possible way that I have to go home at some point. I have to leave this person at some point. I can do the best that I can while they are still around and still with me, and I can do my best as a friend or as a facilitator. But if they were to go, on the way back home and something terrible happens on the way, like somebody yells at them on the street or something like that, it's, no one can control the chaos of the world. And if someone is in that vulnerable state, not of their own volition, then it makes it much harder to build, I think, that, that psychological buffer to be able to, or competency, at least, to be able to manage that outside that context.
Very well said. Very well said. So I'd love to hear in a moment about the one of your practices called somatic circling. I am familiar with other circling practices from friends who are body psychotherapists and yoga in the yoga circles, and my fiance does circling, and John has a form of dialogos and circling. But I like that you included the word somatic with the circling, so I'd love to hear about that. But first, maybe I heard you had a critique of modern wisdom practices as being disembodied, decontextualized, and or objectified. Why do you think that modern practices are susceptible or prone to losing some of the beneficial essence of maybe what they're originally trying to achieve?
I don't think they lose. I want to just correct that, because I don't think they lose the beneficial practices. I think that the benefits of that, I think there are definitely benefits to that. And I feel like this is more of a shared question, because it also has to do with our different practices of yoga. We're both yoga practitioners. I came to it much earlier than you did. But there is vast difference between how we both approach it. And I think that's indicative of what I'm articulating here, with it being disembodied, decontextualized, and objectified. These wisdom practices are thousands and thousands of years old. And so they emerged at a very different tempo of life, like rhythm and tempo of life. So every practice, no matter how big, how small, even the practice of picking up a cup, is there to address some kind of problem, or it's meant to interact, how let's say this, improve the way that we interact with our environment in some way, shape, or form, whether it's internal environment or external environment. And all of these practices come from a particular context, the context in which they had evolved. How many records we have of that and how far back it goes is another issue. But one thing that we can say that is true is that we don't live in the same time and context and scenario as when these practices were developed. So what we're left with, I think, is, really wonderful practitioners who are approaching wisdom practices in their own way. For example, like your yoga practice. Can you share a bit about Mari Sensei's approach towards yoga that you had learned from her?
Her approach was really, really like she didn't give answer. Her approach to us was more about, your answer. So I'm just here to like feed that information from traditional route. But the answer, it's not that I am giving you the answer. Answer is in you. So that made us away from the situation where, you are the answer, you are the guru, you are the, I need you for my life in order to work my life. It was always like, somewhat like detached relationship in healthy way.
And then how did that alter your relationship to the practice of yoga itself?
It really, really made me dive into like inner world much more. Knowing that, like thinking that there is going to be answer in me, like the voice that can hear from myself.
So that's your experience of yoga, right? Okay, my experience of yoga was very, very technical and very physical. And it's, we had a book with the manual. The manual inside there tells you all of the things that you need to tell the student to facilitate, where your hands need to be, I got none of this searching deeply into yourself stuff. So, okay, two very different contexts and very different relationships with the practice. Then you come into the larger sense of this question, which is that yoga is not about just asanas. It also includes a meditative practice after that. We also have the, your yama, your niyama, like all of the kridla, right? The code of conduct as well. But somehow, the asanas have been cut and taken out and put on Instagram, right? And so this is the objectification of it. There's a great amount of money to be made from that. There is also a great amount of motivation that people can get to get fit and to be more flexible, to take better care of the body. Bessel van der Kolk also does wonderful work with yoga as a trauma intervention modality. I'm not disparaging any of that. And to say that it has been objectified is not a criticism, it's a notice or an assessment of a phenomenon that has happened. So then when we come to think of it being disembodied, well, what does embodiment mean? And I think that there has to be a clear distinction between embodiment and habituation. And habituation leans for me a little bit more into the automatic, is that I've programmed my body to do things in a particular way. But embodiment, in the way that I would use it here, is much more in line with the idea of with the 4E cognitive science, Merleau-Ponty's sense of embodied cognition, which is being aware and having a sense of yourself as an embodied being. And I think the best example I can give for this is parkour vision. Well, we call it parkour vision when I was studying, when I was a parkour practitioner in my teens. Like something really, really amazing happens. by learning to vault over a rail, by learning to do precision jumps, by learning to, climb up a wall, you do a step up on a wall and then you get there. After a while, right, it changed the way that I viewed the world. Suddenly, I would walk past the wall and go, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, okay. Ooh, wow, here's a rail. I can do that. I can get there. And it's the sense that of what is capable. What is my body capable of? It doesn't mean that every time I see a wall, I climb up it, right? That's more in line of what I'm talking about with habituation. Embodiment is, for me, a subjective sense of knowledge of what it is, of what is possible. I'm not able to do a handstand. I cannot physically do one. I can't enact one, I'll put it that way. But my body is physically capable of doing that. And I'm aware of that. I'm aware that I have the musculature and the strength, upper body strength required to do a handstand completely independently. But that means that, if I were to trace it back, I know that, that means that the block is not a physical one. I have a cognitive block. There is something that I'm not aware of in my unconscious that is stopping me from doing that. So when I have to practice, or when I engage in my practice with Tiamat, I'm going, what is this? Now I start to recognize causal patterns where I don't express with the backspace of my body a lot. It's very unknown to me. I'm quite a frontal person. So, I need to do Tiamat, engage more with the backspace, and then start to become familiar with it, right? So more rolls, more, coming up from the back, more lying down on the floor, sensing my contact of the body of the back of my body with the floor, for example, and to build an interoceptive understanding of what's there. Mm-hmm. Then, I can start to overcome that block, that cognitive block that's not allowing me to do a handstand. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about it being disembodied, and now coming back to the original question, is this process happening in these wisdom practices? Or is it just do the thing? Is it developing a more ingrained awareness of how one is placed in the world and can enact oneself on the world, coming back to the agency argument? So that's what I'm trying to articulate with disembodied, objectified, and decontextualized.
Okay, yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And really what you said about the kind of people can, or myself included, can be more dominant in one area of our awareness, and what it sounds like your practices will really help people. Sometimes life feels like it's one experience, like in a moment it feels like I'm having one experience, but with this different way of describing how you can shift into a different realm, like a metacognitive realm or the transjective realm. And then you can start to untangle, if it is, you can untangle your experience and see if there's an entry point for this, what's, reciprocal relationship between the external world, the internal world, and the sense-making aspect. So wonderful that you're doing all of this cognitive work in conjunction with different movement practices and different movement awareness. So that brings us on to somatic circling, which is just one of the members of the ecology of practices in Tiamat. But what is somatic circling, and how can it be used? Why is it powerful? And how might people be able to use it in different contexts?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I want to privilege your experience of it first, but before that, I must give credit where credit is due. Circling, is the wonderful, wonderful work of Guy Sengstock and the Circling Institute. There are different forms of circling which are practiced, and I just want to bring that into relationship as well. I learned circling on the Dialogue OS course, which John and Taylor Barrett from Authentic Relating Toronto had collaborated on. And the context in which somatic circling was found, I'll say found, not invented, but we found was within our private research group, where we're just saying, okay, how do we make this relevant to actors? How do we make it relevant to a performance ecology? And so we kind of jammed this out in a way that was actually, I think, quite successful. I really do enjoy this practice quite a lot. But somatic circling, more than anything, is like a code name for whatever this thing is, because we haven't quite named it yet. But yeah, I just want to privilege the good work that has come before me in regards to that. So what is somatic circling and what's your experience of it?
Can I share about how it's born also?
Sure.
Should I? Or I should skip that part?
Do it, yo, do it.
So how it's born, how somatic circling has been born was like, you were like laughing at something.
Also.
And then I mimicked his face, like detail of his face, like really like how wide, narrow his eyes are open, and like really everything. And then he was really annoyed by it, but started to like, it went quite long. Eh?
Yes, it went very long until I had to get invested in it.
Yeah, to the point where we cried together. It was synchronized so much that we cried together. And we came out from it, and then we were like, what was that? What was happening actually? And then we started to try in circling. Yeah. If we were to adapt this like synchronicity, if this was possible, if we were to adapt it with circling context, how would it be? And then that's how we started to experiment with it.
So nice.
And by trying that with circling context, I feel that it's magical, really. Like it's really like revealing layer by layer about myself and the person who is in center. Like not just center person, like me, myself as circling also get to be revealed. What is the thing that I am projecting, and what is the thing that is actually happening?
Yes.
And this circulation, this
reciprocity, I think.
Yeah. It's the thing that allow us to really, really like make a single world that is not just his or hers, not just mine, not just his, not just anybody's, but together's. And I feel, and by experiencing somatic circling, human beings' gesture became much more important to me. Because it's speaking actually. It's not just like random movement that's happening. The body is actually speaking. There is language.
It's not just random. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think when we come to the central idea of circling being to get the other person's world, to be a participant in their worldview and what it's like to be them, can't ignore the body. You know, I mean, the Cartesian model is, the mind and body is separate, but actually no, it manifests itself behaviorally. And from what I've noticed is that, the invitation is to adopt the circle's physical shape as accurately as possible. And so that one layer is already doing quite a lot, in a sense that, it's helping somebody to renew their attention to the person at all points in time, to not be distracted, and have attention somewhere else. So that's a helpful practice within that exercise, but also to keep an eye on the subjective experience of adopting that posture. So how just because I sit in the same way as you might not register for me in the same way that it does for you. So, and of course, the context of circling allows us to share that. Sometimes here, like when I do this, I feel like quite guarded and small. Is that fitting with you, right? And the person might go no. or they might not be aware of it. And this is another sort of like, I think, layer of it is that so much of what we communicate is nonverbal, right? So, one person might not be aware that they touch their face when they talk. And so I might ask, like, what's it feel like to feel your face when sharing that? What's it like to hear your voice grow louder when you say that? And so suddenly, talking about de-automatization, awareness is brought to that thing. Oh, now I have that information. Now I can start to unpack, like, hey, why does my voice go up quite loud that way? Why do I close my chest down when I say that? Why do I trail off my voice?
And the beautiful part is because it's not coming from like judgmental point of view, like the question itself. With somatic circling, we really, really trying to be in this person's body. And depending on like our interoception part, like by revealing my interoception, communicate it, and is it like cohering? And then, really, really like try to synchronize like the detail, like underneath the muscle part even. Yes,
absolutely. And I think this is, I can't speak for its therapeutic applications. I'm not a trained therapist and I don't purport to be. I would like to get training in that though. I can't say necessarily if it can be used in a wide variety of contexts. So I will just speak for the performance domain, which is that as an actor, one thing you got to have is very, very keen awareness of the body and how that's communicating something. So this is a great way to learn from somebody else in an intersubjective frame and experience what they're communicating to you. It might also feel like, oh, I think that if I do this gesture, it feels that way to me. Yeah, but that might not be communicating what you want to someone who's observing, right? And being aware of that is very vital information. Now, I suppose in the meta sense of it, like in relation to the meaning crisis, I'll try and draw a little bit of relevance here, is that when Tamaki is describing here, we are using the body as a kind of object to cohere through to get to somebody else's experience. Right? We're de-identifying from the body. Coming back to that principle of decentering. I am not my body. This is a shape that my body is in. And it's communicating something that I may or may not want. And that might not be accurate. So if I'm going to be effective in generating relationships with somebody, I gotta know if I want to know if like crunching my neck down is making me look intimidating. That might be, transjective again.
I really like the experimental, again, this, checking in whether what we might be projecting, our interpretations we're projecting onto other people, how other people might be accurately or not so reading each other. It seems like this practice brings together so many other areas. You've got Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, which is about how our gestures and facial expressions and noises signal to each other. Then we have Lisa Feldman Barrett's kind of controversial theory. It's not controversial, but there's one of her colleagues has an opposing view. This idea of our emotions constructed and how they expressed is not universal. So then there's errors in communication. Whereas this other argument that there might be, of course, there may be if I sneeze or if I'm crying, sobbing, then that is a pretty reflexive kind of thing that people sob in all cultures. But you can hide those things or you can put on a fake smile. So your experimental process and sharing sounds like you've brought together nonviolent communication in a way, or reflective listening. It's kind of somatic experiencing, which is similar. But what I see you've done differently is you're encouraging people to enact each other or reflect each other with great detail, and not only give the person doing the imitation a chance to say how that makes me feel, but also offering a mirror to the other person to say, okay, this is how you look and this is how I'm interpreting it. And then you can go wherever you want from that point.
Yes, yes. And both people come out of that with a little bit more knowledge of each other and themselves. I think.
Yeah. It's really, really beautiful.
Thank you for doing that with me.
And
I think we were just waiting for supper to arrive or something and just messing around. Yeah.
So this has been such a brilliant conversation. And as we close, maybe you could share where people can find out more about your work. I'll put links in the video description, and maybe explain what's coming up for you in the next few months.
Okay. So we can be found at 5tomidnight.org. That is the number 5, TOMIDNIGHT.org. If you go to the Tiamat page there, you'll be able to find that page is very new, but it's at this point a content page of the exercises that we intend to bring in, or the research that we found that might support that. I'm still working on it, but that's going to be in conjunction with a podcast that I will be launching rather soon, to do a deep dive into existing literature as well as cultural issues, how this impacts the meaning crisis, and trying to answer the question of like, what is Tiamat actually, in a very, very long form way. What's coming up for us is that, as we talked about on John's video, we are building a research center for art and wisdom cultivation that will be in Japan. And it's called RYUON, RYUOEN. And that is where we will be holding a 1-year-long Tiamat course, actually, that runs from the spring all the way into the winter. And if there's a little bit of time here to discuss it, the course structure is something that I'm pretty excited about. In the spring, it's new times, new things. That's where we'll go into really intensive Tiamat practice in residence at RYUON, because we have 20 rooms, so people can come and stay. And it's really immersive. And that includes going into the nature trails, going into the gorge, meeting communities. That will happen for the spring, for somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks. Then in the summer, the invitation is to have a project that you would like to realize, and then bring that in for our summer festival, where we will see how we can facilitate using Tiamat to actualize that project. And then in the fall, it's completely hybrid. So it will mostly be online and live where people want to and can. And that for me is where I would love to have a lot of roundtable conversations with people from art, spirituality, science, philosophy. And we meet up regularly to have discussions around these things. And that's gathering more information. And then in the winter, Tamacha and I want to escape the Japanese winter. So that's the best time for us to fly out and see if each of these participants, or small groups of them, how do we adapt Tiamat to fit into a cultural context? Or since it's been influential for this person, hopefully, how does that integrate into whatever work that they are doing outside of the stuff that we would like to do? And so that whole course is something that I would like to offer to people. And when the crowdfunding goes up, you can book your spots for that course as and when, and then we'll see you all in Japan.
Superb. And I'll add links to those pages. And that just leaves me to thank you so much for your time. You've been super generous, and I hope we can stay in touch. And I've really learned a lot from this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Please remember to subscribe to the Inner Sense channel for more information about the role of your bodily sensations and tips for using bodily awareness to improve your well-being.